What's up, guys? Welcome to another beautifully windy episode here in Southwest New Mexico and another photography basics episode. So this is part 3 of our exposure triangle episode, and today's episode is going to be all about shutter speed. Alright, so shutter speed is probably the easiest thing to wrap your head around in terms of the aperture and ISO and all the different parts of the exposure triangle, but it still warrants talking about it, especially if you're new to photography, because there may be some aspects of shutter that you might not intuitively think of. So either way, we're here, and I've already said shutter speed, so we're going to keep talking about it. So let's start out with, what is shutter speed? Well, it's the speed at which the shutters of your cameras are moving. So hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory, but let's show you a little clip here, and this is the shutter inside my 1DX2. So what may not be completely obvious to you is exactly what the shutter is doing, and there's actually a certain way that the shutter moves that can affect the type of photography and shots that you want. And shutters typically will move like this. They will open and close this way, and as they go faster, that movement change, and it becomes difficult to deal with, especially when you're talking about flash photography, and we're going to get into that much later. But just so you know, for now, the shutters are opening and closing like this. What's up, guys? Future Brent here. So I'm editing this video real quick, and I just realized that I had something that could help further explain this a little bit better, and that is my phone. So I have the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus, and one of the things that it does is it can record super slow motion up to 960 frames a second. And so I thought about it, why don't I try to film the shutter speed and slow it down? So that's what that clip was that you saw. But one of the things that I just wanted to kind of nerd out on you guys real quick and just give you a little bit more detail into the whole shutter speed thing and how it works at faster shutter speeds. So at slower shutter speeds, like up to like around 200th of a second or so, which is usually the camera's sync speed, and that's for flash, so that's something totally different, but there's a reason for that. The shutter actually opens, the shutter always opens from top down, so it opens like this. So for the slower shutter speeds, it will open all the way, and you'll have, the whole sensor will be exposed. But the faster your shutter speed goes, when it starts going up to 1/500th of a second, 1/1000th of a second, all the way up to 1/8000th of a second, the mechanical shutter cannot open fast enough for that shutter speed to allow the entire sensor to be exposed all at once. So what it will do is it will open like this and travel down the sensor with just a little tiny gap, and the faster the shutter speed, the smaller that gap is. So at 500th of a second, it starts here, and it will open maybe this much, and it will scroll down like that until the whole sensor has been exposed to the light. And then at 1/8000th of a second, it will maybe open up just a tiny little gap like that and then go down. And then that light, and from the gap, from that tiny gap, is what's hitting the sensor and exposing it as it goes down to eventually expose the entire sensor to the light. So that's called a rolling shutter, and that's really important for video, and that's why you see the tops of things or straight lines being actually portrayed as looking like bent. And that's because there's a time difference. So this part of the pole or straight object is actually older than this part, and therefore the sensor has moved down and motion has moved. Especially if the camera is moving, then you're going to see that warp happen. Alright, so that's all I wanted to add to that, just so you guys know how the shutter is working, and that it's not always open for the entire sensor for the entire time, especially at faster shutter speeds. That's what I wanted to try to convey here, and hopefully my little cell phone video kind of showed that. In the cell phone video, that was at, I recorded the 1DX2 shutter opening at 1/400th of a second. So you will be able to see there is a little bit of a gap. It's blurry because, again, it's not 960 frames a second. It's still not fast enough to capture how fast that's moving at 400th of a second. But you will see the gap in there as it goes down, and it's not open all at once. So that's what I want to try to convey. So hopefully you enjoyed that little nerd intermission there, and let's get back to the regular video. So what is the shutter speed affecting? The shutter speed is affecting two things: time and motion. So the first aspect that shutter affects for your photography concerning the exposure triangle is time. and that is the amount of time the shutter stays open to allow the light to come in. So before we go any further with that, let's talk about the numbers for shutter speed. So these are fractions, and everybody loves math. At least I love math. So the fractions correlate with the time the shutter is open. So you have a 1 over, and if you have a 1 over, like 1 over 2,000, that's 2,000th of a second. That's super fast, right? That's a little faster than what I can do. And then it can go all the way up to into full seconds, and then you can have half a second, and then you can have a full second, and then you can go all the way up to 30 seconds, or you could put your camera in bulb mode and tell it to stay open for hours at a time, and you could get cool stuff like this. So we have a huge range of shutter speed and the amount of time that the shutters are staying open to let in the light. So after the light comes through your lens, your shutter is telling your camera how long the light is allowed to hit your sensor. Okay, good point. So Brittany just brought up a point behind the screen here, was show you guys this real quick concerning the numbers that you might see on your camera. So if you see this where it says 125, that is 1/125th of a second. So it doesn't show the whole fraction. And then if you see this with the little quotes, that's a full second. So this here is set to a full second. And then you can see it all the way up to 30 seconds. And then you can see it all the way down to 8,000 on this camera. So that's what those numbers mean. They omitted the fraction so that it's easier to represent on the digital part of the camera. But that is the fraction. And that's important to remember. All right, so the second thing concerning your photography that the shutters are going to affect is motion. And this, of course, goes along with time. So the longer your shutter is open, the more motion is going to be seen in your image. So if you have a very fast shutter speed and you want to freeze that action, it's going to look something like this. This is a very fast shutter speed. Then as we start to increase the shutter speed, meaning we're going to leave the shutter open longer, and we have something, you're getting to a more natural movement like this. This is a relatively medium shutter speed. So things are starting to move around a little bit, and anything that's moving is you're going to see that just tiny little bit of motion blur. And then as you progress further and open that shutter even longer, the movement is going to be greatly exaggerated. So this right here is like a 2-second image, and you can see the entire movement through the frame, and that's because the shutter was open for 2 seconds, and in 2 seconds, that's what we saw. And then you can see like here with 30 seconds, that's way longer, and that's by default, that's what most cameras can do. Well, most mirrorless and DSLR cameras can do up to 30 seconds. And if you have a phone, most phones can do like 10 seconds or even 30 seconds. A lot of phones can do 30 seconds now. So that's really handy for stuff like long exposures, smoothing out water, waterfalls, all that kind of stuff. Really, when you really want to exaggerate and show the passage of time, that's when leaving your shutter speed open for longer is going to really help. And so my last favorite thing concerning shutter speed, my personal favorite type of photography, is astro photography. So obviously when you're taking pictures at night, you need the longest shutter you can possibly get away with. And I'm not going to go into detail about that because I have a whole video about astrophotography basics right here. So if you want to up your astrophotography stuff, check that out. So even in astrophotography, you can still either freeze the stars or you can do a star trail like this. And by freezing the stars, I'm doing somewhere, like 10 to 15, 30 seconds even, and that's still going to have those nice those pinpointy stars. But then if I do something like this, like a 90-minute exposure, leaving my shutter open for 90 minutes, then we get these beautiful star trails, and all of that is all dealt with the shutter speed and showing that passage of time. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up here because that was kind of covering all the basics of shutter speed. Like I said, there's a lot more to it, just like there is with every other part. And next week what we're going to do is we're going to go over the exposure triangle as a whole and work on how to balance that for using all three, shutter speed, ISO, and aperture, all together in different scenarios to make sure you're always getting your right exposures without being an auto and the camera messing them up for you. So stay tuned for that for next week. If you have any questions about anything that I went over concerning shutter speed, leave those in the comments below and I'll definitely answer them. If you like this stuff and you want to see more, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I've got new videos every Tuesday and Friday. Hit that like button if this video helped you out. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.